This is the decision point with Anand and Nanduri. Anand, we have some big moves, big moves before the draft, and I'm talking about line movement. Big line movement on Bryce Young to be the first overall pick. We talked about it on the Sonic Truth show. Since we recorded that show, the line has moved even more. Initially, I thought, well, this must mean that Carolina's definitely picking Bryce Young. There must be some inside information that has leaked out. The sports books have gotten their hands on it. This is happening. The Carolina equity holders have won the war, the battle for who they're going to pick, because I think the coaching staff preferred Stroud. They're familiar with Stroud, and I think they prefer him for a bunch of reasons. But that may not necessarily be the case, right?
Yeah. So basically, I think what's going on here, everything that happens until about 96 hours before the draft, you hear all kinds of noise. And the problem is it's really tough to discern what's actually happening from random reports or something someone heard or, reading too much into one thing or another. And what I think is happening here, there's no way to be sure, but what I think is happening here is sportsbooks are hedging their risk against all of the tickets that they have for CJ Stroud to go number one, because for a while there, it was assumed a foregone conclusion and that line would move even further and even further and even further. CJ at one point was, I think, a minus 350, minus 400 favorite, which are an implied odds of almost 85%. Like there's whatever the line was, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I mean, like you're talking about odds where you are paying the price to that it is 80-ish% going to happen, right? And so now they're hedging some of that risk by taking advantage of the Bryce Young news that's been leaking out that they really like him, that he just went in for a visit. And you kind of saw this with the pro days too. The number didn't move around quite as much, but as each player's pro day, right, whether it was CJ's or Bryce's or Will Levis's or Anthony Richardson's, their odds to be the number one pick shifted slightly just during right after their pro day, because there's a lot of news that leaked out about, oh, well, we love this player. Well, of course. I mean, it's going to come out for everybody. And so they're taking advantage of basically people buying into whatever is going on at the moment. And I don't think that whatever decision Carolina is going to make, I think they've already made it, right? Like I think they're going through the process of these top 10 visits simply to confirm what they already know. I don't think they're doing it. I don't think they're re-meeting with Bryce Young to find out anything that they didn't already know, right? It's more so just, hey, let's do our due diligence on all four of these guys. And if the guy that we think should be number one comes out of this process again as our number one, then we know that our process was good and we'll take him. And I still believe that it's going to be CJ at the end of the day. But I think what we're seeing here is people taking advantage of, sportsbook taking advantage of media that's leaking, that's positive Bryce Young news, and hedging some of their risk against all of those Stroud tickets that were written. Does that mean that Bryce will not ultimately be the pick? No, I don't think that it means that either. But I just don't think that it's the end all be all that it's being reported to be, as, oh, the odds have moved. Now Bryce is this huge favorite to be number one. I think part of it is hedging risk. I think part of it is the news cycle. And remember, we were still not talking about Trayvon Walker number one overall 2 weeks out last year. And so things change really, really, really quickly. And until about 96 hours out, it's really tough to get a gauge of what a team is actually going to do. And sometimes we don't even know until, minutes before or as they're making the pick in that top five even. So last year was a little bit easier to read into the tea leaves after it was kind of confirmed that all of the stuff that came out about Walker was true. This year it's tough because, one, you're talking about quarterbacks, and someone not taking a quarterback in the top four would be a big deal. Someone moving out of a spot in the top four that we're not looking at right now would be a big deal. So I think you're looking at a scenario where that top five on your draft board could get so messy so quickly that I think you're just hedging risk wherever you can as a sports book right now.
That's fascinating. I did not think about that angle at all. That essentially, for weeks now, The sports books have been looking at all these C.J. Stroud tickets that have been written over the last few months and thinking we're going to take a bath. C.J. Stroud's going to go number 1, and we're going to be run over. What are we going to do? How do we offset this? How do we manage risk? Well, we got to find a way to tell the public a story or show them a perception that new information has come out that would put this C.J. Stroud pick in doubt. Shroud the Stroud. Shroud the Stroud in doubt. So that's what this is. This is sowing seeds of doubt. As soon as news comes out, okay, just give us something. The sports books are just like, we'll do anything to try to show the public that there's another potential pick in play. Give us something.
Right.
The NFL gave them something, and instead of a minor adjustment, they made a major adjustment because that's all they needed. They just needed a little toe hold to get a grip, and then they could launch Bryce Young's odds to a place where they could say, okay, now it's in doubt.
Yeah,
right?
And I think the other part of it, too, that's worth discussing is Stroud
this is so
is
counterintuitive. It used to be that what books would do is when they wanted action on the other side is they would give you better odds on these other options. This is a complete psychological shift in how these sports books are doing business because they're not moving the Stroud odds.
No, the Stroud odds are relatively close to what they were, right? They're instead of, I think it was minus 150 at one point, and I think it's like plus 155 right now, plus 135, whatever it is. They're not going to give you plus 250 anymore like they did a month and a half ago. It's just that number doesn't exist for them anymore. And so what you're seeing is, despite Bryce Young being a relatively heavy favorite at the moment, the Stroud price has not changed all that much, even though it's gone from minus side to plus side. It's not like they're giving you plus 250, plus 300. They're basically trying to capture as much as they can on Bryce to be the number 1 overall pick and CJ to be the number 1 overall pick, and trying to get them to somewhat be even in terms of their risk. That way, regardless of who wins, it doesn't matter. Like who wins, ultimately wins the race. It doesn't matter. And
I think a psychological warfare.
Yeah.
That
look,
the books are now waging on the public.
Look, last year, I remember 72 hours before the draft, maybe even 48 hours before, the exacta box, the trifecta box of Walker, Hutchinson, Derek Stingley Jr. was 81-1 across the board, wherever you found it. It was somewhere between 75 and 81-1, right? I think the highest number was DraftKings, if I remember right. Within 8 hours of posting that line, it got blown up, and they reopened at 6-1. Right? Like that's exactly what happens here. Right? Like once they know. But until then, they're gathering as much information as they can via pricing tickets in this way, pricing tickets in that way. Will the public react to this? Will the public react to that? Because again, draft markets are not super set in stone, right? It's not a product that you have any kind of control over. Like you can move, you can remove, a number. You can't remove who is going number 1 overall. As soon as we know, right? And that's when they move. I think it was the night before Trayvon Walker moved to like minus 10,000. Like at that point, right?
That's when
and
we're
Bryce Young's not there. CJ Stroud's not there, but we're going to know at some point who the number 1 overall pick is, because they're going to stop writing tickets that make sense for anybody to pay the price on.
We're not at that point yet. That's what you're saying.
No, we're not.
That's why it feels like a shell game. It really does. God, wow, I fell for it. I think I fell for it because remember, 2 weeks out, the 49ers were prepared to select Mac Jones.
Yep.
This was not something that was reported in the media. This was something that was talked about by San Francisco executives, that they were about sure as you can be it was going to be Mac Jones. And then Shanahan went back into his office for another week of all-nighters, going over and 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 over these few glimpses of Trey Lance that we had at North Dakota State. And he finally came out of his office and his eyes were glazed over and he was like, I think we got to go Trey Lance, guys. The upside is too much. I can't. So it's very possible that Carolina is not yet 100% certain who they're going to pick, that their mind could be changed at some point.
Agreed.
It's also possible that these books are seeing some of their sharpest customers, right, go in on Bryce Young, and that's the signal, that's the cue they're taking.
Yeah, and look, the opportunity here, right, as a bettor, if you read this out all properly, right, there is an opportunity for you to create the market that you want. What I mean by that is if they're going to move the lines all over the place like this, right, there is an opportunity to have both a plus odds Bryce Young ticket and a plus odds CJ Stroud ticket. And if you got them at long enough odds when in the last, I would say probably for CJ, you probably had to do this about a month and a half ago. But for Bryce, when it started really moving in CJ's direction, about a week and a half ago, and you could get Bryce at plus 200 or longer, right? You had the opportunity to potentially have a plus 250 Bryce Young ticket, a plus 250 CJ Stroud ticket. And that's really where you take advantage of the inability for anybody, right? It's not just a sports book. It's the inability for anybody to capture this market. God forbid Bryce Young goes number 1 overall. Does Houston move out of 2? It changes everything, right? Like that's why writing a ticket for number 1 overall, writing a ticket for number 2 overall, number 3 overall, everything changes if one doesn't go the way you think it is. And that's why no one's minus 10,000 right now, is because every other price that's out there is currently based on right now Bryce Young or CJ Stroud to go number 1, right? And they create ripple effects based on what happens there. And number 2 overall could be a quarterback. It could not be a quarterback. If Houston decides to sit there and say, hey, we want an edge rusher and we don't think any of these guys are Bryce Young. He was our 1 overall best player in the draft. And if we don't get him, we're not taking a quarterback. If they decide to do that, the ripple effect then is Arizona controls the draft at 3, which we think they do anyway for Anthony Richardson. Indy now has a choice at 4 because they now have their choice between whoever's left between 2 of the 3 would be left in that case between Stroud, Richardson, Levis, right? Everything changes if that 101 doesn't go the way they think it is. And that's why these markets are so liquid. You can't trust reliably anything that's going on there until you get to a point where we know something for certain. The only thing that we know right now is that Carolina is going to take a quarterback. That's it. That's all we know.
That is all we know. And the markets aren't as much liquid as they are volatile.
Yeah.
Volatile. And the larger point here is that my reflex response was, the books must have inside information. That's not necessarily true. I think can look like it's based on inside information. It can be so extreme that your initial instinct is, inside information, I got to watch out for this. This is but no. But there are other mechanics in play behind the scenes, and the books are often incentivized to make it look like there's inside information driving something when it's actually something much more banal like risk management.
Yeah. And some of the parts of this that are funny are, if you go back and look at draft markets over the years, historically by this point, either there is a favorite, like a huge favorite for number 1, or We have no idea until
And by
about
the way,
72.
thank God the quarterbacks are on top of this draft. Thank God. Remember last year, you talk about Trayvon Walker.
Oh, my God.
That was boring.
Yeah.
That was really boring. I was like, don't care. Like, Trayvon Walker. Like, which edge rusher is going to go number one? We've got 3 guys, and they're all really good. Okay. Like, putting quarterbacks at the top, raising the stakes.
Yeah,
it does
especially
lead
when you have
more chaos, more volatility, and just it's much more engaging. I'm much more into who's going where this year and why. Well, there's a quarterback bias when it comes to position. The thing is, it's not unjustified. It is also the most valuable position on the football field, and they also are the face of the franchise oftentimes. So that's the nice thing about the NFL. It sort of aligns where in some other sports, the most important position is not the face of the franchise. But in the case of the NFL, it is the quarterback. But then these other positions are very valuable. Edge rusher, left tackle, right? And that's why when I look at Cody's big board, I check out his big board, he's got Jalen Carter, he's got Will Anderson, he's got Nolan Smith, Johnson, Skoronski, Miles Murphy. Like, he's got a bunch of defenders and offensive linemen as his top players on the big board. Not necessarily quarterback. Quarterback were not the highest graded position. The top quarterbacks were, like I said, behind a lot of these edge rushers and defensive ends and left tackles. But you have a bunch of teams at the top that desperately need quarterback, and these quarterbacks are just good enough.
Yeah. And, when you look at Cody's big board, the thing that stands out is Carter being number one, right? We've known one-man wrecking crew is the best player on that Georgia defense 2 years ago when they won the first of their 2 national titles. And you remember the chaos surrounding Jordan Davis coming out. We knew how good he was going to be. And you've got his better, basically his riding mate, but the player that's better than he was. Jalen Carter is as good a defensive tackle prospect as you'll probably ever get. Like, you get one of these guys super ultra rare. And obviously there are questions about some of the off-field stuff and people can claim that his motor runs hot and cold. Whatever, dude. You're talking about a one-man wrecking crew. Like, what he can do as an interior defensive lineman is absolutely wreck the shit out of any game plan you want whenever he feels like it. That's the kind of player that you draft in the top 5. He's a freak. Just an absolute freak. And I know that teams are concerned, some have moved him off his draft board after the whole incident at Georgia the night after the national title game. But I mean, if we're talking purely football player, he's easily the best player in this draft.
Cody said the same thing to me. He said it's Jalen Carter and everybody else.
Yep.
Right? And so this is the big board. By the way, the big board is free. So Cody has we have the NFL draft order. All right. So if we were to go to the NFL draft section, okay, on Player Profiler, we have the draft order where we show all the picks and which ones were traded and the team's previous record and all those things. Day 1, day 2, day 3. So we break it up really nice for that. And then we've got the mock draft index. And the mock draft index will show the aggregate of all these different services: Bleacher Report, CBS, Draft Blaster, Draft Network, ESPN, PFF, us, Sports Illustrated, Sharp Football. We're going to have Rich Rebar from Sharp Football on the Mind of Mansion this week. And you can see there's some interesting things here. The mock drafters are like, oh, Stroud Young, and then Will Anderson and Tyree Wilson, and it's very different from Cody's big board, where Cody's like, actually Jalen Carter, guys, actually Paris Johnson. If you're trying to get the best players at the most valuable positions from the draft, if that's your goal as an NFL GM, this is what you should be doing. This is what you should be focused on.
Yeah.
Cody's killing it, as usual.
Yeah, Cody does great work, man. And that big board, I agree almost all the way through. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good, right?
Yeah.
It's so he's got individual grades for all the positions, and you'll notice like some of these guys, like Bijan Robinson, they have a very high grade, but they're outside the top 10. Well, because a highly graded running back is not the same as a highly graded offensive lineman, right? So Skoronski has short arms. Skoronski could end up playing guard in the NFL. And Skoronski is still more valuable than Bijan Robinson, even though Bijan Robinson is in the upper percentile of running back prospects the last decade. Skoronski's not quite there, but if I'm an NFL team, as we've talked about in this show many times, you're going with Skoronski over Bijan Robinson. That's just the move, right? You wouldn't, and also you'll note what's the edge rusher missing. Edge rusher missing. Tyree Wilson's missing from the big board. And, Cody says, the mock drafters really like him. The mock drafters really like him. Not so much Cody. We got to scroll, and he certainly likes Stroud. He likes Levis, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. But you got to keep scrolling to number 16 to find Tyree Wilson.
I think a part of the whole Wilson fascination is projecting, right? And Cody's grading these players out as they were in college, and some people are projecting them as they go into the NFL. But I think he's done a really good job of aggregating a lot of the data that people choose to ignore, which is, if you go watch Tyree Wilson highlights, they're amazing. He looks incredible. Like if you ever want to watch something that really blows your mind, Tyree Wilson against Texas is that, right? But it's not there all the time. He's a really good football player, taking nothing away from him. But these are the kind of nuances that you need to have, and be willing to go out there and say, hey, I don't see it yet. Prove me wrong, right?
The consistent production was not there. And when Cody's going to the combine, he's going to these pro days, and he's talking to scouts, they're like, where do you have this guy? Where do you have this guy? Well, how about this guy? Oh, right. Yeah. And it's some of these things are indicators that, this player is going to get drafted a little higher than the mock draft community believes, or vice versa. Also leads Cody to go back. Like some of these scouts will tell him, hey, go watch this game. Go watch this game. Go carefully watch him in this game. And then he will. And then it's like, okay, I see where the scouting industrial complex has identified something about this player that the mock drafting community hasn't really picked up on. Because with a guy like Tyree Wilson, why wouldn't you just project? Why wouldn't you just run out to best case scenario? The guy he's certainly the type of player that I would draft if I were an NFL GM. Right? You have that kind of size. I mean, good night. He's 270? Yeah. 6'6", 270? But if he's not gonna, if he doesn't have the mental makeup, he doesn't have the consistency down to down, then you can't put him in the same class of prospect as a Will Anderson, as a Jalen Carter. Cody doesn't have the concerns about Will Anderson that I've heard, that Will Anderson's too small to play edge in the NFL. I've heard that. Have you heard that?
You're hearing it from it's not everybody, but it's a select group of people that are concerned that 6'3", 250 is on the lighter side for sure for an NFL edge rusher. And the thing is, it's not like you can make him play stand-up linebacker. Like, he is an edge rusher. That's what he is. The question remains, right? If you can dominate the SEC like that, that's basically as close as you can get to NFL caliber, offensive linemen that you're going to go against. But at the same time, there is a difference between a 21-year-old and Tyron Smith, Trent Williams. Like, there are just dudes that are built different. And the question is, does the size show up more? as an issue in the NFL, right? Because we've had plenty of guys that were size outliers that just balled out in college, that get to the NFL and it's not quite the same, right? They're not necessarily busts, but they're pretty good players instead of world beaters.
Who's this? Like who?
I think the best, it's more often than not. I mean, obviously this is a complete apples oranges comparison, but there's a reason that there are parameters for height for quarterback, because if you get below a certain threshold, the hit rate is so low, right? That even if you are the outlier, it's not worth the risk. So the question is, does Will Anderson pass that, whatever it is, arbitrary line for each individual NFL team where it's, hey, we will not take an edge rusher that is smaller than this? Because if you go look at relative athletic score, you go look at anything, by any metric, he is not big for an edge rusher. And carrying 250 as an edge rusher against the Trent Williams or Tyron Smith or any of these crazy left tackles that we have in the league is a really tall order. And I'm not saying that he can't do it. He's a phenomenal football player. It's just that is the concern that's out there. If there is any concern with Will Anderson, is just simply, can he hold up at his size?
Is this the Isaiah Simmons corollary? There were that you might not be able to find a position for him, that he was an Butkus Award winner, and he's flying around the football field making plays every snap in college, and in the NFL, if you don't have a well-defined position, your value plummets.
Yeah, so the thing is, that's the concern, is will they have to get will whatever team chooses him have to get creative about how he's deployed, right? I personally don't have those questions, but people whose scouting opinions I trust much more than my own do. And I mean, it's not, hey, like, sound the alarms, red flag, don't draft this guy. It's more of a, if we draft Will Anderson, we need to have a plan for how we're going to use him. And if that plan doesn't work, we need to have a plan B about what his best NFL position is. And so I think no matter what, he's an edge rusher. Now, do you stand him up? What kind of defense do you want to run? There's all kinds of questions here. But at the end of the day, go look at Cody's big board. Go watch him at Bama. Dude just makes plays. He is a phenomenal football player. I have no such questions, but people whose opinions matter, in the scouting community have some concerns that he is not the size of edge rusher that you want to take top 3 overall.
So the big mover is up Cody's big board. Skoronski, even though the short arms, like it's really all about positional value. Also, Lukas Van Ness. Lukas Van Ness. See, this is a player I think that they can project. 3 technique. We can put him as a defensive lineman who is versatile, that can stop the run and can rush the passer. That's the type of guy that the NFL can look at and go, oh, we know where to play this guy.
Yeah. There are no questions where Lukas Van Ness is going to play, right?
Right.
I mean, he's your classic 3 tech. He's going to be incredible. I really hope he goes somewhere where they get to have a little fun with him and move him around a little bit. But I mean, God, Iowa's defense this year was just crazy. I mean, they just had all kinds of dudes. I love Jack Campbell. If you got to watch any of Iowa, you know, one-man cleanup crew. Love his game. Hopefully he's a Bear. I think Chicago fans would be really happy about that. But it's kind of this edge class is just deep. It's guy after guy after guy. You go 8, 9,
Miles
10
Murphy's
deep,
moving up.
right? You go 8, 9, 10 deep, and you kind of realize, like, this is a really good time to need an edge rusher because they're just abundant. There are so many of them in this class. It is not a good time to need a safety. Holy mother of God.
Broderick Jones, baby. Broderick Jones. Look at the grade.
Stud.
Broderick Jones has a grade that's the same as Christian Gonzalez, right? His grade among other offensive linemen. But that position is so valuable that he's got a top 10 player on the big board.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it works, people.
Yep. And I mean, like, just looking at all of these guys in this range are such good football players, such good value for where you're going to be able to get them. I think this first round of this draft is going to be awesome.
I've heard whispers and rumblings. Jim Nagy, first and foremost, the head of the Senior Bowl, claims that there is a distinct possibility that you have one and one alone wide receiver drafted in the first round. So the under prop on wide receivers in the first round is the way to go right now. We've been talking about this for a long time. It's just very shrimpy. It's a very shrimpy, like, hey, look how productive Josh Downs was. Well, we have a lot of wide receivers that don't meet the typical thresholds we'd like to see for wide receiver. We're really squinting. Like, hey, Zay Flowers 5'9"? It's like we're really squinting. And what it has led to, which is amazing to me, it's led to a player like Jonathan Mingo rising, if for no other reason than he's the only one with an alpha body.
Yeah.
Like, hey, congratulations, Jonathan Mingo. You picked the absolute best possible class. He's now a top 10 wide receiver on our rookie rankings. Because we're like, this guy's 6'1", 226.
Yeah.
I mean, he's comparable to Alan Lazard. But, I mean, there are very few outside wide receivers that can be deployed in a possession situation, that can be deployed on the perimeter when you need them in the red zone. There are just so few of these dudes that Mingo is rising by process of elimination.
Yeah, so I think that the strangest part is, I mean, we knew what Jaxon Smith-Njigba was, right? Everybody wanted the testing numbers. It you could see it. There's no argument to be made there, right? But for the rest of this class, there is at least some level of concern with every single wide receiver we have. And so I think something, especially, you get someone like Mingo, he's in a perfect spot, right? Like, in any other draft class, he probably just gets lost in the weeds with the rest of them. But there's just no one else with this profile.
You couldn't have drawn it up better. His agent's like, this is amazing.
Yeah, best class ever.
Yeah. And because of his size, because he's 226, his athleticism score on Player Profiler, number 2 in the class among wide receivers.
Yeah.
Right, number 20 all time. I mean, if this guy's going to have a 98th percentile speed score, 91st percentile burst at 226, you're necessarily going to be one of the most athletic wide receivers we have in the database because we size adjust. It's just that, well, he was at the Senior Bowl, and he wasn't super dominant as a producer. And even at the Senior Bowl, like, he wasn't as impressive as Christian Watson was last year. He wasn't even as impressive as Jalen Tolbert was last year. So what the hell do you do with this guy? Well, you draft him. If you need any kind of wide receiver of his type, you go ahead and draft him. He's probably going to go second, third round now because he stands alone as a true alpha in this class, and it's interesting. Do you think that it is possible that there is only Jaxon Smith-Njigba drafted in the first round?
I think it's unlikely that it's only him. I think someone else at the bottom of the first will take a stab at someone. But again, like, it's the Cole Strange thing. It only takes one team to fall in love with some aspect of whatever.
The Cole Strange. Right? I remember that from last year. We were looking at each other in Vegas going, what the fuck is this?
Right? It only takes one team to fall in love with you.
Remember Trayvon Wilson? They do this to us. It's like, New England, this is a 4th, 5th round pick. What are you doing in the second round with this guy?
Oh,
remember
God.
Tyquan Thornton last year? We were like,
oh,
really?
My God. What are we doing? Yeah.
You have a board where it's like, okay, Sky Moore, George Pickens are going next, obviously. And they're like, no. Tyquan Thornton. No. Wan'Dale Robinson. No. Alec Pierce.
We were sitting there laughing. That was fun. That was.
And then we're okay. All right, guys, cool. Right. Okay, fine. Do you, NFL? Whatever, man.
Right. No, I mean,
yeah, that's what's going to happen. The NFL is going to do the NFL, and for that reason, you could, man, 2 wide receivers sounds about right.
Two sounds about right. I think we could potentially see 3, but I don't think we get to 4 or 5. Like, yeah, they're not there. And if 4 or 5 do go in round 1, it's teams are desperate reaching for something. There just aren't 4 first-round wide receivers here, period. There probably aren't more than 1 or 2 at the end of it. But
well, I think that it's becoming popular to vault Zay Flowers into the first round, sometimes even the top 20. Cody loves Zay Flowers.
I do too.
I mean, unlike Jonathan Mingo, Zay Flowers completely and utterly showed out throughout the process. And like he was much more dominant as a senior, as a producer. Again, it's always difficult to draft a senior in the first round. Typically, you want to have like some extenuating circumstances. Chris Olave coming back post-COVID year. Like there were some reasons why Chris Olave was a senior, right? A lot of his teammates he wanted to stay in school with were staying for one more year. So it made sense. They wanted to run it back, try to win a championship. There's all these reasons why Chris Olave was an exception. Most of the time, these seniors will trick you, especially Big 12 seniors. Oh, my God. Big 12 senior, run and hide. So at least we're not talking about a Big 12 senior. We're talking about Zay Flowers at Boston College. You would think that, we'll see, right? We'll see. And, whether he goes to the Patriots or not. Because I remember last time that there was an edge rusher that the Patriots should have absolutely, and then he went to the Titans. Do you remember this?
I do not.
Yeah, so the Patriots, they had a Boston College edge rusher all teed up, and they had just lost Chandler Jones. You remember this? And he was there.
I don't remember the player, but I do remember the scenario.
I want to say that they took N'Keal Harry instead. I think that's
boy.
I think that's what happened, and then Harold Landry ended up becoming like one of the top edge rushers in the AFC.
Yeah,
and it was like the most obvious. It was like, okay, you just lost Chandler Jones. The guy's at BC. Okay, he's available, and he shouldn't even be available. He's only available because he was injured. Okay, he's he was at another level in terms of, we're talking about the size adjusted athleticism. This is a slam dunk. And then they go and they get weird with a wide receiver or safety like they always do. So it makes a lot. I mean, Zay Flowers is the perfect fit for New England. He's too perfect. They won't pick him. He's Boston College, perfect fit. They won't pick him. They're not going to pick him. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. They should. The middle of the first round, I wouldn't blink if they went Zay Flowers. They were not going to do it. They're not going to do it. And then the question is, Jordan Addison. Is Jordan Addison a first-round pick given his size and the lack of athleticism? He was an early declare, but he feels like an early declare that is like the 40th pick in the draft. Most years, a guy that looks like Jordan Addison is going to be precisely the 40th pick in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, really good football player. Like, don't take anything away from him. It's just to warrant round 1 draft capital as a wide receiver, you need to have, there are certain boxes you need to check that I don't think he quite all the way checks. In the way that, if you draft a Jaxon Smith-Njigba, that you have a day 1 slot receiver that is basically out of the box, if not Pro Bowl caliber, then close, right? You're looking like, we like to do the thing where we project best case scenarios all the time. Well, I think it's also prudent to do, like average scenarios. If he meets the middle of his range of outcomes, if he meets the low end of his range of outcomes. I mean, I think the middle of the range of outcomes for a Jaxon Smith and Njigba is an Amon-Ra St. Brown, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I think
these
upper
guys
end of
are
it.
similar. I want to say that that's maybe his best comparable.
And I mean,
if not, is it close? We don't have the best comparable up for him right now, but we will. It's very close. I want to say that it's at least a top 5 comp for Jaxon Smith-Njigba is Amon-Ra. Absolutely.
And the thing is, like, if you're projecting a player like a Jaxon Smith-Njigba, right? If he does to the NFL what he did to the Big Ten in 2021 when he was healthy, right? That high-end comp is not the season that Cooper Kupp had in 2021. I don't think that's just a preposterous outlier. But I think that's what the high end of it looks like is whatever your regular Cooper Kupp season looks like, right?
Yeah.
With a Matthew Stafford, because I don't 2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns is ridiculous to assume for anybody. But I think that's what you're getting. That's something that's worth middle of round 1 draft comp, right? While I like Zay Flowers a lot of these guys that potentially could be round 1 receivers that might get drafted in round 1 probably don't actually have round 1 grades. And it's just a weird wide receiver class where you're finding whatever it is you're looking for, right? It's not necessarily that they have anything in abundance. It's just, oh, well, this guy's a little bit bigger than the rest of the class, as we were talking about with Mingo. Like,
right.
You're looking at all of these guys, and it's not that they're not good football players. Like Jordan Addison's a really good football player. He's, again, just a guy that's probably more of a round 2 guy than a round 1 guy. And that's perfectly fine. There are plenty of really, really good receivers that came out of round 2 of the NFL draft instead of round 1. Like it's by no means is it a death sentence to go in round 2 instead of round 1.
Yeah, Cody does believe that Jordan Addison and Zay Flowers have round 1 talent, particularly Zay Flowers. So this what I think will likely happen is Zay Flowers will go at the end of the first round. There will be 2 wide receivers drafted, and then Jordan Addison will go early second, not necessarily because he's not a first-round pick caliber player, but because there's a lot of quality linemen, there's a lot of quality edge rushers, there's Bijan Robinson, and then the potential of Jahmyr Gibbs going in the first round. There's a lot of discussion around that. And then there's the tight ends. There's Michael Mayer, and there's a handful of tight ends that might go round 1. We'll see. It might just be Mayer. According to Cody, he thinks it's just going to be Mayer. We'll see about that. But can you tell the guy that I'm circling here, right? When we're looking at this particular area of the board, you see the guy that's plus 8 in terms of on the move. He's gone from the 29th player on the big board to the 21st player on the big board. You see this guy?
Anton Harrison.
This is what I'm talking about. I mean, I have a type. a type. I mean, this is what I want right here. And also a guy like Felix Enundike Azuma, this guy could grow, right? He's 6'3", 255, but if he ends up being 6'3", 270 with athleticism, I mean, let's talk about that. That's the type of guy. If you're drafting in the 20s, this is what I want, right? The thing with me is if I were an NFL GM, Jordan Addison is what he is. He's been pretty capped out in college. It's not like there's a huge development curve,
beyond
inflection point out there in the distance for Jordan Addison. He's just a phenomenal football player. You're getting what you're getting, and I think that's an early second-round pick. In the late first, baby, because we've talked about this, the great value of the late first is that you get that fifth-year option, and then so that your home runs really pay off in a big way. Well, that's the reason why I would be chasing the fifth-year option on a potential cornerstone left tackle or edge rusher. Give me the guy with the athletic profile, the guy that can add some, just 10 to 15 pounds. If I see athleticism, I see a good scouting grade, and I see the ability to add 15 to 20 pounds over the next 3 or 4 years, that's the guy I'm circling, especially at the edge and tackle position in the first round. That's the Christian Darrisaw corollary. We've talked about this many times, but that's the guy I'm going to chase there. Unlikely to certainly not going to draft a running back there. And I probably would rather get my corner or my wide receiver in round 2, because there's typically plenty of athletic corners that make it into round 2 and plenty of quality wide receivers that make it into round 2. Remember, DK Metcalf was drafted at the very end of the second round.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
It's not,
and DK Metcalf was like the type of wide receiver that every scout would salivate over. And then somehow he made it to the end of the second round. Woof. Like, you need to know where the supply and demand pockets are. And it's pretty clear, and you would agree with this, that Christian Darrisaw profile, that's the best value you're going to get on a guy like that. Second half of the first round on an edge rusher or an offensive lineman. Then you can pivot in the second round to wide receiver and cornerback if you're trying to max out value position by position.
Yeah. And the upside guys, quote unquote, right, that you're talking about aren't necessarily projects. They're guys that can play right away.
Oh, yeah. Anton Harrison can play right away.
Yeah. They're not players that you have to stash, quote unquote. Like, they're, because a lot of the development talk that circulates is regarding quarterbacks, and some of them do have to sit, right? If you draft Anton Harrison, he doesn't have to sit. He's just going to grow into potentially a really, really good. He's going to go from a pretty good football player to a really, really good one. If it happens the way we think it's going to happen, right? Where he continues to grow and develop as he plays. And by year 2, year 3, you have an all-pro guard.
And that's what we're talking about with Tyree Wilson, right? Tyree Wilson is a guy you draft in the mid-teens. He's a guy you take a shot on in the teens. He's not a top 5 guy like these mock drafters are deluding themselves about.
Yeah, and I mean, again, they're chasing the upside. It's Ziggy Ansah, but obviously not to that level of projection, right? But again, like, the first round is mainly, the discussion is always about the ceiling, right? Not necessarily about the floor. But if you have a higher floor, the odds that you get drafted higher increase, right? You don't want a complete boomer bust prospect in the top 5 picks of the NFL draft. That's just insane.
The third pick in the draft in 2020 has been traded. Did you see this?
That's my boy. Yeah.
Jeff Okudah. He was flipped for a 5th rounder.
Mm-hmm.
This tells me that the Lions are as close to giving up on him as you can get without giving up on him. And it shows me that there's a team out there that thinks that this guy has potential, and I would be doing this. This is a move I would make. I would go after Jeff Okudah because I know that whatever he looked like last year coming off this Achilles is not what he's going to look like this year. The Achilles is a long, drawn-out process to come back from, and you also have to be careful, right? You have to be careful what teams you're dealing with. Like, for example, if Baltimore calls about a player, I'm hanging up.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
No way.
Yep.
Right? And, the Lions are calling about a player, I'm probably hanging up.
Yeah.
With Brad Holmes, the heater he's been on lately.
If the Browns call you about a wide receiver,
you got to be careful. But even if it were Brad Holmes, if he had a guy that was a top 5 pick, a guy that was best comparable athletically to Jalen Ramsey, and you can explain away why a 24-year-old looked like a shell of his former self with an Achilles tear, and the fact that they've likely looked at their contract structures and they've just decided that next year they're not going to be able to extend this guy. They don't pick up the 5th-year option. It's over. To not pick up the 5th-year option on the 3rd overall pick is quite something.
Yeah,
it's noteworthy. Whenever that happens, it's usually a quarterback that's just an outright bust where they don't pick up the 5th-year option. Sometimes they do anyway. Didn't they pick up the 5th-year option on Derek Carr?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Derek Carr was a 2nd-round pick.
It was I know who you're thinking of.
There was a
It's eluding me.
quarterback
I know exactly who
who
you're thinking.
was
This is gonna drive me
definitively
crazy.
mediocre, and the team had no choice but to pick up the 5th-year option. It was not
Yeah.
Derek Carr because he was a second-round pick,
No.
but he was in that. It was in that conversation where the guy had one good season out of 4, and they
Yeah.
picked up the 5th-year option. So that
Yeah.
has happened with the quarterback position, but otherwise, it's a rare thing. When you saw that deal happen, what did you think?
My immediate thought was Atlanta is the kind of team that can afford to allow him to rehab and come back, whereas
Yeah.
Detroit needed a corner they're trying to win now, right? Like the window is open in Detroit. You're trying to win now.
Defining the window, baby. Both these teams are well defining their window. This was one of the interesting trades where I saw it come down, and I was like, "Oh, that's great for both teams." And this shows yet more evidence that Atlanta's moving in the right direction. Because when we first started the show, we were like, "This team is in an accidental rebuild. They have no plan. They're allowing the equity holder Arthur Blank to insert himself where he should not, and they got the bare minimum for Matt Ryan. They were a year late dealing Julio and all these things. We were very critical of how they were managing, and now this team is being managed in a much more sound way where they're taking shots because they know that they're not going to be competitive this year, and almost helping to make sure they're not competitive, but developing a player who could end up being a real bargain, a steal in his age 25, 26, 27 season. And then on the flip side, the Lions are doing the right thing too, because I'm always impressed when a team does not allow a sunk cost to prevent them from optimizing their roster. So this was really an indicator that, hey, both these teams are savvy. They're talking to one another. I even think it's cool to know that when Brad Holmes wants to do a deal, he picks up the phone and calls Atlanta. So if you're Atlanta, this is a great sign. This is a great sign that Brad Holmes wants to do a deal with you. It's a great sign that they're picking the right kinds of players to pick out of the dented can bin.
Yep.
It's great, man. So and we know we love their uniforms, right? So they have a great rich history with the Dirty Bird. There's a lot going on in Atlanta where I really want. It's a southern, town where they have got Georgia, and it's in college football nation, in the center of college football nation. I really want the Falcons to be good, and I'm seeing it start stacking up. That they're going to be in a year or two.
I think Atlanta is one of those teams where you're going to look in probably 12 to 18 months and kind of see everything that they've built come together, whether it's with Ritter or with someone else, right?
Right.
And I mean, look, we've talked about it before. There are multiple ways to build a contending roster, but the easiest way to do it is just acquire good football players at discounts, right? Which they've done. Again, dented can bin for Okudah. They paid AJ Terrell. He's one of the best corners in the league, right? Same draft class as Okudah. And they're starting to fill out their roster, the Jesse Bateses of the world. Then you re-sign Caleb McGarry. Now it looks like that offensive line is going to be really good again. You may have had something in Tyler Algier last year. London comes back. Kyle Pitts is there. Like, there is a lot to like about what they have moving forward. And I think it'd be a mistake to just sit there and look at 2023 with this team when they're really looking into 24 and beyond, once they kind of get to where Detroit was 2 years ago, right? Where now you're losing game. It's the order of operations, right? You go from losing big to losing small to winning big, right? And it's very rare that you get to skip any of those steps. Right now, the goal for the Falcons this year is to start losing small. They still need that top-end draft capital to acquire someone next year who's a really premier player, whether that's an edge rusher, whether that's a quarterback, whatever it is, right? Now, the most fun thought experiment that you could have with Atlanta is that they have a bunch of close losses, kind of like the Bears did this year. And somehow they end up with a Caleb Williams or a Drake May home run. Congratulations. You did it. Right? But even if they don't, this roster is good enough that they can go get somebody, right? Or if Ritter does produce the way that I'm personally not super in on him, but again, we have such a limited sample size of what he can actually do at an NFL level with competent offensive weapons. If you put all of this around him and he looks good, this team could be way better than we think they are, right? And nobody's really talking about what the on-field product will look like. Everybody's talking about how great we think their offseason is, right? I think universally Atlanta's offseason is lauded as one of the best in the sport by basically everyone. But the on-field product could be much better than we think it is, even this year. And you'll know a lot by week 5, 6, 7 about what this team is going to look like going forward. But every decision they've made seems to be calculated, seems to make sense. They're investing in the right areas. They're picking up dented cans in the right spots. You know, like you're not looking to overpay middle linebackers. It's everything they're doing makes a lot of sense. And it seems like they, for the first time in a long time, have a sense of direction. I love what Atlanta's doing. I think they're following the Detroit model perfectly. And it's just a matter of, is Ritter the guy? Is he not the guy? If he's not the guy, find a guy. That's it. I mean, I think they've done everything. Everything else they've done shows me they know what they're doing.
Did you see that John Metchie is participating in the offseason program in Houston?
I did not.
That's great.
Oh, it's awesome.
Isn't that great?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Don't forget,
That's awesome.
James Conner came back, right? James Conner had a form of cancer and came back, so it has been done. And so he's on track, I think, to play.
That's so cool.
Yes.
That's all. Another one of those, right? Like you every now and then you get a football moment that's significantly bigger than the sport. And I think Metchie coming back and even just doing anything this year, right? Like I'm not gonna sit here and project what his season looks like, but I mean, just getting out there, catching a few balls, like that first catch at NRG is going to be so cool. That's just another one of those remarkably talented football player, really awful situation. But when we get the comeback stories like this, that's always really, really cool.
When I talked about like the 10th pick in the second round for Jordan Addison, I was thinking about John Metchie.
Yeah.
John Metchie was the 12th pick in the second round. Undersized, but he had a clean profile coming out of Alabama, 1,000-yard season. Again, wasn't dominant on a relative basis because he was sharing the field with a lot of other dominant receivers. And that's what happens. And, Jordan Addison at USC. So you're going to have coming in from a high-profile program. Yes, you're undersized, but there's a good chance you end up going in the early second round. So, again, that's the comp that I had in mind, before the cancer diagnosis. John Metchie went ahead of, we talked about Sky Moore, talked about George Pickens, Alec Pierce, went ahead of all those guys. And so it's very possible that it just exceeds all expectations this year. He's a guy that no one should have dropped. We said you must stash this guy and hold on to him in Dynasty because it's not unprecedented in any way that he could come back from this. And don't forget, in 2020, even going all the way back to 2020, he had 900-plus yards. So he was a well-utilized piece of that Alabama offense, and that wide receiver room has been hollowed out. They likely go quarterback at 2. I know that you said that if Bryce Young's not there, they could go another direction, which would be fascinating. Some of these teams, they dig their heels in, and if the guy that they want, who they grade as a top 5 pick, is not there, and the other quarterbacks, their scouts do not grade as a top 5 pick, then they are not going to pick him, period. They're just going to they're going to either trade down or they're going to go edge or offensive. They have a lot of needs in Houston. I actually would agree with that. I think they're years away. They're years away in Houston. So it is premature to go quarterback. If I were Houston, I would be trading down. I would be in the same situation as Arizona. Everyone says, oh, Arizona controls the draft. Arizona's definitely trading down. I believe they are. They have 3 offers now for their pick. If I'm Houston, I'm the one that's shopping the pick, not Arizona. And then Arizona has to come in later once we've traded our pick, right? So Chicago trades their pick. Okay, our turn. Now we get to trade. Now Arizona, now it's your turn. But I think they are infatuated with Bryce Young, most likely. I think is what's going on. I mean, they drafted John Metchie over Pickens for which is probably a general affinity for Alabama players. So that helps with that sort of speculation. So it's interesting. It's very interesting to see what Houston does. But would you agree with that? Like if it were you, and you were leading the Houston franchise, would you wait a year to go target quarterback?
If the guy that goes 1 overall is the only quarterback that we have graded as a top 5 player, yeah. Because the thing is, we talk about the hit rates of first-round quarterbacks all the time, right? Like it's widely discussed. It's a very hit or miss thing. What discussed as often is first round pick hit rates in general. Again, it's about 50-50. The hit rate is not what you would assume it is. So if you're sitting there and picking, right, and you're Houston and you just need football players, you want the surest possible thing. Nobody's going to give you anything for your number 2 overall pick. Can you sit there and take Jalen Carter and feel good about it? Because, I mean, Cody and I are aligned there. He's the best player in the draft, regardless of position. Right? Ideally, you move down. But the thing is, someone has to want to move up. And we know plenty of teams are willing to do business with Arizona. So, in theory, yeah, you move out of there and you take the best player that comes to you at whatever pick that you have. Because, again, slapping Bryce Young behind the Texans' O-line and weapons is not going to produce a result that's great immediately, right? Bryce is a really good football player. He's not the, okay, like, let's go get this guy and he changes life for us tomorrow, right? Like, there are a lot of really good players in this draft at quarterback, but no one's changing life for you tomorrow. There is no Trevor Lawrence, right? Like, I think that's where, if you're Houston, it's a really tough decision to make, because I have CJ and Bryce graded basically neck and neck. And it's hard to say that one is a top 5 pick and the other isn't. That's why, personally, if it's me, I'm taking whichever one is there. But if they don't have them graded out that way, then the correct process here is to trade back, get the best player available, stack another pick either this year or next year, and really try to rebuild this thing bottom up. Because, again, a quarterback this year, it's not Trevor Lawrence. They're not going to fix everything for you. You have a lot of work to do if you're in Houston, right? Like, this roster is actively bad. Just slapping quarterback over it is it's not going to fix it. Yeah.
It's not ready. It's not ready. The cake is not ready. It has not risen yet. It's too early for a quarterback. So I think that Houston and Arizona really control this draft, in that if Houston goes quarterback, then there's a higher likelihood someone trades up to go quarterback, and then we have a much higher probability of it going quarterback times 4. That's a possibility. It's also a possibility if Houston drafts Jalen Carter or trades out for someone who wants to move up to get Jalen Carter or Will Anderson, that we see Stroud at 1, Young at 4, or more likely Young goes at 1, Stroud to the Colts at 4, and then Richardson and Levis fall out of the top 10. That's also possible.
Yeah, I don't think both of them would fall out of the top 10, because I think someone's going to Vegas at 7 if they're there. I don't know which one, but I think one of them falling out of the top 10 is entirely possible. But I think the most likely scenario is the one we painted last show. quarterback could go 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
You could also see one of them fall out of the top 10. Again, this is why we're talking about these draft markets being so crazy. Nobody knows anything. It's all speculation right now.
It's crazy.
Right? Like, and as soon as we do have anything, right? As soon as we have anything pegged on our draft boards, everything's going to change, right? Like, the team that traded up to 1 was going to matter as to whether it was going to be Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. That was the favorite. It was the Panthers. So obviously CJ became the favorite in that draft market immediately afterward. But again, before that trade was made, Bryce Young was again the favorite to be number 1 overall before that trade. So again, we don't know anything until we know something, right? Who is Arizona going to trade with? It's probably going to be closer to draft day. I don't think they're going to move 3 this early. So again, now you're projecting what team is going to move up to 3. Are they going to prefer Richardson or Levis? What if Stroud's available? What if Young's available?
That's
right?
the thing. What if Stroud falls to the Raiders?
Yeah. Like, there's so much chaos that can and probably will happen round 1 day. And like, look, we're super excited to be there. That's going to be awesome to cover in person.
Because
this is one of the more,
you and me,
Cody.
This is one of the, it's going to be great.
This is one of the most interesting top 5s of a board that I've ever seen, because it's impossible to read the tea leaves on what anybody's doing, other than the fact that I personally believe CJ will be the number 1 overall pick. But on the chance that I'm wrong, right? We could see Bryce Young go 1, Carter, Anderson go 2, 3 to teams that trade up. You could see the Colts swing for the fences with Anthony Richardson at 4, and suddenly Seattle's sitting there at 5, open for business, either deciding, hey, do we want to put our long-term future in CJ Stroud's hands, or do we want to sell this pick for a king's ransom, right? Like, we could wake up, or we could be there 8:45 p.m., and Seattle basically just won the lottery. Like, that is a legitimate scenario. I'm not saying that it's the most likely one, but that's a scenario that can happen. So every team that's in that top 5, top 6, top 7, until you get to the Raiders, right? Those 7 picks at the top of this draft are so swappable. Anyone could move up, anyone could move down, right? And the players that essentially 1 overall is going to tell you domino effect what's going to happen with a lot of the rest of these. But it's just so interesting that 2 weeks out, we're talking about quarterbacks here. It's not like we're talking about edge rushers. We're not talking about offensive tackles. We are talking about the face of your franchise for the next decade plus, if you're right about them. And we don't know who it is yet. And that's fascinating. That's where all the intrigue in the draft cycle comes from, is we have 4 round 1 quarterback grades. And who knows how these teams have them, ranked.
Hendon Hooker could go first round.
Hendon Hooker could go first round. Again, it takes 1 team to fall in love with you.
I like Hendon Hooker a lot.
I do too. But there is concern that he is a 25-year-old that played in a pop gun offense that threw vertical routes over and over and over again. Like,
yeah, but he only had what was it? 2 interceptions last year?
Right. And there's, like I said, there's a lot to like about Hendon Hooker.
Yeah.
But you're talking about Lamar Jackson is 1 year older than Hendon Hooker. 1.
Well, Lamar Jackson's taking some of the intrigue away from his situation by partying with Odell Beckham. This tells me that Lamar fully intends to be back with Baltimore. Does it not?
Yeah, I don't think.
Am I faked out again? Just like I was faked out by thinking, the sports books must have inside info on Bryce Young. Am I faked out by going, look at Lamar Jackson? He's showing his hand. He shouldn't be partying with Odell. Shouldn't be having a good time.
I don't think it's necessarily a fake out. But if you're Baltimore, if you're trying to again read the tea leaves, so to speak, you're not giving $15 million guaranteed and $18 million overall to one of Lamar's buddies to not bring him back. You know what I mean? Like,
that's a lot of money they gave him.
Yeah, that's an insane contract.
You thought it was insane? For 1. You thought it was insane?
Yeah, it's insane.
There's 1 year.
$18 million, $15 million guaranteed.
Yeah,
for a guy
$3 million in incentives. Yeah.
for a guy, I love Odell. Made it perfectly clear what I think about him as a football player. You're talking about a guy that didn't play in 2022. When he did play in 2021, he was useful mostly as a red zone threat and as a sideline to sideline 1B to Cooper Kupp's 1A. You're talking about a guy that's most productive seasons were in the mid 2010s, which we're now talking about. Guys, the catch happened, what was that, 8 years ago? Like, it's burned into my brain. Still, I can see every frame by frame, everybody that's ever watched that. It's one of the most incredible athletic feats I've ever seen. At the same time, that was 8 years ago. Like, we need to stop acting like Odell Beckham Jr. is the same player now that he was in 2015 when he made that catch. He's not. He's still productive. He's still worth something. He's
very productive the second half with Los Angeles.
Really good number 2, right?
Yeah, in
but again, they're paying him to be a 1.
I thought that he would sign for $10 million with $5 million in bonus money, as opposed to 15 and 3. 15 was a lot.
15 in and of itself is crazy. 15 guaranteed is what's insane.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
a guy that didn't play last year. That's quite the statement to make to Lamar.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It can't, because the thing is, it can't be anything else. This front office is too smart. Again, what you said earlier. If Baltimore calls you trying to make a trade, you hang up the phone. This is not a front office that doesn't know what they're doing.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah,
so in this case, it is a very strong statement. One, that they believe that Odell is now fully healthy and can help them. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Two, I mean, it's been forever. Their fan base has been enraged with them forever for the receiving options that they've given Lamar. But two, if we have Bateman and Odell, right? Regardless of who ends up being the one, it should still be Bateman as the one, and Odell basically is the 2. But that's significantly better than what they trotted out there at any point before, and at least shows Lamar, hey, we may not be able to hit home runs in the free agent market at receiver, but we got you probably the best one that's out there, right? And we even overpaid. We went out of our way to overpay your buddy to do it. It just shows something, right? I think it should.
One second. I do have one more question for you.
Hit it.
About Lamar Jackson not having an agent, especially now that there's been all these agency mergers. So do you have some thoughts on these agency mergers that are happening?
Yes.
You do?
There are lots of thoughts.
We'll get to those coming up next. Underdog has supported us since 2020. Much of what you see on Player Profiler is because of Underdog, because of their support. Get the Underdog app, plug in that promo code Underworld, and they're making the NBA fun. Their NBA pick'ems, it's changed my Wednesday night. It's changed my Sunday afternoon. I used to play Underdog just for the best ball drafts. I mean, the best ball drafts are amazing. These draft rooms fill so quickly, and you can win life-changing money. You want to take advantage of all the sleepers we talk about on this show? Well, what better place than in an Underdog draft room to do that? And I recommend taking your Underdog play to the next level by diving into their NFL pick'ems. It's important to correlate those NFL pick'ems. You can pick both the quarterbacks and the wide receivers to exceed expectations. Correlate them, and you can 5x your payout. Bada bing, bada boom. Underdog Fantasy, the promo code is Underworld. For an instant deposit match up to $100, Underdog is the truest friend of the Underworld. Love Underdog.
Good people over there.
Talk to us about these agency mergers. What's going on?
So basically, I think the agency world as a whole is kind of misunderstood. It's really grueling work. It occupies 24/7, 365 of your time, right? Because functionally, the asset that you're buying into is a person, right? It's not a product. It's an athlete. It's an individual. So a lot of the risk involved is if you have this, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round player that you're spending all this time, energy, effort, money on, hoping that they hit and taking percentages of their contracts. It's grueling work to put together, this agent resume that's going to land you, top 5, top 10, top first round potential picks. And what's happening is these agencies are growing to be so massive because they already have the network, they have the financial backing, they have worked in the industry for 30, 40, 50 years. They've seen everything, they've done everything. They're probably going to push the middle agent market out. And it's basically going to be which of these major contract houses are you going to sign with, which, to be honest, is going to streamline a lot of the process. If you sign with Lee Steinberg, for example, as Joe Burrow did, Lee's team has been doing this for 30 plus years, right? Like it's been nothing about Burrow's deal, about the extension, about, him getting drafted, how much his comp will be. Nothing about that is new to Lee and his team, right? Whereas if you or I tried to become an agent tomorrow, right? Go take the test, get NFLPA certified, get approved by the league to be an agent, and tried to go do this. There's a lot of stuff that we just don't know. And I think these giant agency mergers are just further proof that at some point it's going to become even if I'm a 5th round pick, what agency am I going to sign with? I think the middle agent, the smaller agents are going to be phased out and or picked up by a lot of these companies, right? It's just going to, the process of hiring an agent is never going to be easier than it is, 3-4 years from now, when basically you're deciding between super agencies, regardless of where you're being drafted. Basically what's happening is small agencies, that have 20 or 30 players are being bought out by agencies that have thousands or hundreds. And it's creating a space where being an agent on your own is almost impossible, right? You just don't have the resources they do. You don't have the access they do. They have networks of attorneys, accountants, business managers, because every player is self-promoting now, right? It's a world where not only are you the product on the field, you're now the product off the field. And you're starting to see it in terms of, for example, Jalen Hurts has an entire marketing team, right? Everywhere he goes, Jalen Hurts is promoting himself. It's all the crazy outfits that get posted to Instagram. It's the, whatever tweets come out promoting whatever product. Agents have changed the way that people make money in the influencer era, because now football players are influencers, right? Like whether or not they want to be, you can choose to lean into it or you can choose not to lean into it, right?
And they can start doing it in college, so it really extends the life cycle of these engagements.
Right. And so basically now that you have NIL in college, agencies are only going to become more important because you're a 16, 17, 18-year-old coming into college. You have no idea what you're doing, what you're navigating. You've never done this. You have no idea, right? It's only going to become more important that people hire agents at that age to be able to navigate all the stuff that's going to come forward. Perfect example. Jordan Davis had a life-changing event happen and break publicly at the scouting combine. If you don't have an agent, big trouble. If you have a great agent, you're once again being talked about in the top 10. Who's his agent? It's Drew Rosenhaus, right? Like, that's the value of having an agent. He's seen it before. He's done it before. He remembers what happened with Laramie Tunsil. He remembers what happens with other guys whose draft stock slid because of something that came out immediately. How do you mitigate that risk? As a player, you hire somebody that's done it all and seen it all.
Do you think that Rosenhaus is going to sell out to one of the bigger shops? Because they're NFL only. They're certainly one of the biggest NFL shop, but they don't have the quarterbacks, and they focus on the NFL. And eventually, even Drew Rosenhaus and his team, they're not going to be able to compete. He's also getting older. He's going to get tired of the hustle and eventually sell this thing to CAA or one of the other massive agencies, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a CAA. It's going to be a Wasserman, one of these huge brands that ultimately take that over. But again, there is value in Drew Rosenhaus himself, right? So I think along with it, unless he wants to retire and get out of the game entirely, which these guys work 24/7, 365. If you ever want to, like, at some point, I hope somebody publishes a story about a day in the life of an agent, because it's absolutely crazy. But if he is
there
the
a
product.
movie called Jerry Maguire?
I mean, I don't know that it's quite that. I don't know that it's quite that. But Drew is a unique case. I think Lee Steinberg's a unique case where their name carries so much of the weight of that brand that once they're out of it, selling off to a CAA or a Wasserman just makes so much more sense than trying to continue to do it on their own.
Who's coming with me? You.
Shout out to the agents, man. The real MVPs. And the Lamar situation specifically is a little different. But again, there are roadblocks that could have been navigated by an agent.
Dorothy Boyd, thank you. And be sure to check out playerprofiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.